So it's a miracle that we're together today. And I apologize for the delay. It's a serious delay. And I will try that today's share will be a miyut amachzik es hameruba. So the topic we are discussing, as you know, you got the Mala Mekoimis, Yesai the Geda Mitzvah Sukkah. And what I say today seems to be a big chiddush, even though to me, I think it is very, very pashut and very logical. The Minchas Chinuch, a very famous and well-known Minchas Chinuch, Shin Chof Hei, comes to be miyashav a kasha that we find twice in Tosis and Masechet Sukkah Daf Tes, and once again Daf Lamed. Sukkah Gzula, why don't Chazal say it's posel mishum mitzvah habo ba'aveira? Just like lulav hagazul is mitzvah habo ba'aveira, Sukkah Gzula, Chazal give us different interpretations. And why wouldn't it be? Because of the din of mitzvah habo ba'aveira. So the Minchas Chinuch says, Sukkah, besides Leil Rishon that we learn Tesvav from Chag HaMatzos, is mitzvah kiyumis. If he does not eat a sudas kavah, he has no chiyuv to sit in the sukkah. And therefore, by a mitzvah kiyumis, there is no psul of mitzvah habo ba'aveira. Mitzvah habo ba'aveira is only a mitzvah that one must perform. He has a chiyuv. But a mitzvah kiyumis essentially is not about sitting in the sukkah. You have as if an aveira to eat chutz l'sukkah. And therefore, a mitzvah of this nature, there is no psul of mitzvah habo ba'aveira. And the Minchas Chinuch says the same regarding tzitzis. Reb Shimon Shkop and Shari Yosha on one hand, Reb Yosef Engel on the other hand, argue with the Minchas Chinuch. But I want to touch upon a very clear aspect of the Minchas Chinuch. His Havana, as the Havana of many other Achronim, that Sukkah called Shiva is a mitzvah kiyumis. If you don't eat an achilas kva, you don't have a chiyuv of Sukkah. If you don't sleep, if it would be possible for a person not to sleep called Shiva, he wouldn't have a chiyuv Sukkah. L'aniyas daiti Sukkah called Shiva is a chiyuv. It's not a mitzvah kiyumis. It is a mitzvah chiyuvis. But when we find in the Gemara, Teishvu ke'en taduru, and a Sukkah Daf Chof Hei, the Gemara says, we know mitzvah put them in a Sukkah because of Teishvu ke'en taduru. So just like all year round, when a person has tsar sitting at home, you would move out. So he's entitled to do the same with a Sukkah. And if he has tsar sitting in the sukkah, he doesn't need to sit in the sukkah, he can move out. What I want to explain is, Teishbuk and Taduru is not only a drosha mesuyemes from which we learn a halacha mesuyemes, mitzvah potom and a sukkah, it is the very definition of mitzvah sukkah. It is the very hagdara of mitzvah sukkah. So when the Torah says v'sukkah teishvu shivas yomim, it's not a mitzvah kiyumis, it's a chiyuv. However, the way we understand this chiyuv is, you don't have a chiyuv to sit in the sukkah called shiva. You have a chiyuv to live in the sukkah called shiva. And that is what Chazal fundamentally mean when they say teishvu ke'en taduru. So if I would ask each and every one of you, everyone listening to this shir, where do you live? You might be sitting now in the Beis Medrash. Under normal circumstances, we would be giving this shir somewhere in a shul, somewhere in a kollel, somewhere in a yeshiva. We all would be sitting together. And if I would ask, where do you live? You wouldn't say, I live in the Sanza Shtibo, in the Lakewood of Beis Medrash and BMG or BTO or this shul or that kollel. You live where you live at home, but right now you're sitting in the Beis Medrash. So the gather of mitzvah sukkah is a chiyuv. You need to live in the sukkah kol shiva, but you don't need to sit in the sukkah kol shiva. And that is precisely what Chazal mean when they say teishu ke'en taduru. So the most similar concept, the way I understand it, is the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. We have a mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael. For the past 7 months, since the Siyum Mishas in America, I haven't traveled abroad. I'm living in Eretz Yisrael. But in normal circumstances, I usually travel 2 to 3 times a year to America, sometimes to Europe, sometimes to different countries. But even when I am in America, East Coast, West Coast, or in Europe, or anywhere, I don't live there. I live in Eretz Yisrael. So you live in Eretz Yisrael because that is where you have your home, but you might be traveling and you might be elsewhere. The same is regarding mitzvah sukkah. A person must be koiveya dira in sukkah kol shiva, but it doesn't necessarily need to sit in the sukkah kol shiva. So Beleil Aleph Shel Chag, when a person is koiveya dira besukkah, as long as he isn't koiveya dira chutz lesukkah, he lives in the sukkah kol shiva. There is a sentence in Divrei Chaim al Torah, not in Shuvah's Divrei Chaim, but in Divrei Chaim al Torah, which seems to be a gewaldige chiddush that Divrei Chaim says, a person is Mekayim mitzvah sukkah even when he is metalach b'shuk, and many don't understand. If he's in the shuk, if he's in the marketplace, how is he Mekayim the mitzvah of sukkah? And I say yes. He is a Mekayim the mitzvah of sukkah because he was koiveya dira b'sukkah. Once you are koiveya dira b'sukkah, it is where you live. And if this is where you live, you're Mekayim the mitzvah sukkah even if you're elsewhere. The same as Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. If you live in Eretz Yisrael, you might be visiting America, you might be visiting Europe, you might be wherever you may be. But your home is in Eretz Yisrael, your family is in Eretz Yisrael, that is where you live, and you're Mekayim the mitzvah of Yeshivas Eretz Yisrael. So once a person is koveya dira b'sukkah, the Divrei Chaim is right when he says he is mishalach b'shuk. But even at that very same moment, he is Mekayim the mitzvah of a sukkah stage of Shivas Yomim. So the point I'm trying to make, Teishvu ke'en taduru, is not just the halacha misuyemes. It is not just what Chazal teach us mitzvah potom and a sukkah. It is the very essence, the very mahus, the etzem magdora of mitzvah sukkah, which means you don't need to sit in the sukkah. You need to live in the sukkah. And therefore, sukkah, kol shiva is a mitzvah chiyuvis and not a mitzvah kiyumis. Yes, if you don't need to eat the sudas kva, you don't need to sit in the sukkah. Because if you don't eat a sudas kva, you're not koveya suda, you're not koveya dira elsewhere. If you eat a sudas kva out of the sukkah, then you koveya dira out of the sukkah. One cannot live in 2 places at the same time. Mitzvah sukkah. And that is why as long as I don't eat an achilas kva and I don't sleep chutz l'sukkah, once I was kaveya dira in the sukkah, I am mekayim mitzvah sukkah kol shiva. And mitzvah sukkah kol shiva is a mitzvah chiyuvis. You don't need to eat in the sukkah. And if you don't eat an achilas kva, you don't need to go back to the sukkah. It is only Leil Aleph Shel Chag that we learn from Matzah, that you're mechuyev to eat a kazayis pas in the sukkah. But once you do so, you live in the sukkah kol shiva, and that is etzem the mitzvah. So there's a Mishnah in Sukkah Daf Chav Ches Amud Aleph. It's one of the Poshet Mishnahs in Masechet Sukkah. People almost think it's a Gadata. But the way I understand, that is the most fundamental Mishnah in the entire Masechta defining Mitzvah Sukkah. Kol Shiva, Adam, Oisa, Beisai, Arai, Visikosai, Kava. Kalem no on the Sukkah, Source no smile on the Sukkah. That is not only a detail. It's not only a detail of Mitzvah Sukkah. That is Mitzvah Sukkah. That is Yisoid Advorim. That is Etzem HaHagdora. Kol Shiva, Adam, Oisa, Beisai, Arai, Visikosai, Kava. Once you do so, you are Makayim Mitzvah Sukkah, Kol Shiva. So according to my opinion, we have a Gavaldige Chiddush. What is the din Holchei Drochim Pturim in a Sukkah? So a person was Meholchei Drochim, bottom in a Sukkah. Maybe he was anointed even the first night of Sukkos. Maybe the first night he was Mekayim the mitzvah, but then he had to leave. And he was bottom in a Sukkah. So he ate many Esudas Kvar Chutz L'Sukkah. He comes home Hoshana Rabbah in the afternoon, 2 hours before the Shkia. He's not hungry. He has no reason to eat a Sudas Kvar. But in my opinion, he is mechuyev to go to the Sukkah and eat a Mechilas Kvar. Why is that? Because Kol Shiva, he was Poto. So he wasn't Makayim Mitzvah Sukkah. He was Korveya, Suda, Chutz L'Sukkah. That means all these 7 days, he was not Makayim Mitzvah Sukkah. He wasn't Mechuyev to be Makayim Mitzvah Sukkah because he was Holchei Drochim. But now when he comes home Hoshana Rabbah in the afternoon, he's no longer Poto. So from this moment on, he has a chiyuv of Sukkah. He's not hungry. He has no reason to eat. But he needs to force himself, go to the Sukkah and eat an achilas kvar, because now you're no longer Holchei Drochim, you got home. You no longer have a teretz not to be Mekayim Mitzvah Sukkah. You need to live in the Sukkah. The Sukkah stays with Shivas Yomim. So according to the Meches Chinuch, it's a mitzvah kiyumis. So if I'm not eating, I'm potter from Sukkah. According to my understanding, it's not a mitzvah kiyumis, it's a mitzvah chiyumis. So in normal circumstances, B'leil Aleph Shel Chag, he was Kaveya Dira V'Sukkah. If he's not Kaveya Dira Chutz V'Sukkah, he has no problem. But according to my opinion, he has a problem. So Kol Shiva, he was potter. As he comes home, he's no longer potter. From this moment on, he has a chiyuv, the Sukkos, Teishu, Shivas. This seems to be a very novel halacha. Did it occur to anyone throughout the ages? Yes, fascinating Tshuvas HaRashba. Chelek Gimel, Siman Reish, Pei Zayin. And this is an argument between the Shoyel, the turn to the Rashba, and the Rashba himself. Not always do we know in Shivas HaRishonim who are the people that asked the Gedolim their questions. But usually we assume that if we find the argumentation of the Shoyel in Tshuvas HaRashba, we could assume he was a Gavra Rabbah. Otherwise, his words, his opinions, his pilpul would not be found in Tshuvas HaRashba. So there's a machlokes between the Shoyel and the Rashba, precisely this Nakuda. So the Shoyel of the Rashba says, if a person comes home, Shana Rabbah, then he's chayiv to be Makayim the mitzvah of Sukkah. And he could be Makayim the mitzvah in many ways, eating different ways, And the Rashba responds, I don't know exactly what you mean. He could be Makayim Sukkah in many ways. But the Rashba does react. And the Rashba says, if he comes home in HaRav in the afternoon, he does not need to be Korbeya Dira B'Sukkah. And why not? Teishu Ke'en Tadu. Which is a profound argument. The way I understand the Rashba agrees with the Shayal. On one hand, he's Mechuyev B'Sukkah. He is Mechuyev B'Sukkah because he's no longer Holchei Drochim. Now that he's home, what reason does he have not to be Kaveh Dira B'Sukkah? However, saying that he's Mechuyev to wash and eat the Sudas Kva, even though he's not up to it, he's not hungry, that in itself goes against the principle of Teishvu and Kaduru, Mitzvah Bottom and Sukkah. So on one hand, the Rashba agrees. L'cha'oira, the Svara Yeshara would be, now that he's home, he's no longer Maholchet Rochim. He no longer has any reason or any p'tur not to be Makayim Mitzvah Sukkah. But on the other hand, the principle of Teishvu and Taduru is all-encompassing. It is the same principle that teaches us Mitzvah Potom and a Sukkah, which means you do not need to act in the Sukkah different than you would act in your home all year round. So all year round, if you're not hungry, you don't wash. If you're not up to it, you wouldn't eat the Sudas Kva. The same applies to Mitzvah Sukkah. And if he comes home, HaRav in the afternoon, and he's not hungry, in normal circumstances, you would not wash and eat at home, potor from doing the same in the Sukkah. But if we learn this Shuvas Rashba carefully, what I see in the Rashba is, if not for the Svara Teishvu and Taduru, which patters a person from Mitzvah Sukkah, if under these same circumstances he wouldn't eat the Suda at home, the Rashba would agree with the Shayel. If he was Holchet Drochim and he comes back on a HaRav, yes, now he has a chiyuv to live in the Sukkah, and therefore he needs to wash. And this would seem a gewaldige chiddush. So my fundamental approach to Mitzvah Sukkah, I apologize all my life. And the Mechas Chinuch was a genius. I don't recall whether I ever told you this, but it's a very interesting comment. The Goyish Welt quotes Sir Isaac Newton, was once asked, how does he dare to reject Archimedes, the Greek? He was a giant. Isaac Newton said, Archimedes was a giant, and I'm a little midget. But I'm a midget that stood on the giant's shoulders, and therefore I soar farther than he said. 500 years before Archimedes, we find the same moshel in Chuvas Harid, Rabbeinu Yeshayahu Rishon, who was the Tosfos Rid. And he quotes the story, Kvar Omer Echod HaPhilosophim. How do we dare to disagree with the Rishonim, with our predecessors that were far greater than we are? So 800 years ago, the Tosfos Rid, Rabbeinu Yeshayahu Rishon, brings this moshel. So many times when I, in my shiur, I disagree with the Minchas Chinuch, I do so with tremendous humbleness. The Minchas Chinuch was a giant and I am a little midget, but sometimes midget stands on the giant's shoulders and he sees even farther than the giant who carries him on his neck, on his shoulders. So the Minchas Chinuch understood That mitzvah sukkah called shivo be'etzem is a mitzvah kiyumis. If you want to eat, you need to eat in the sukkah. You don't want to eat, you don't have the mitzvah. And I say no. Teishvu ke'en teduru is the very definition of the mitzvah. It is not only a din of mitzvah, but in a sukkah. Kol shivo, you need to live in the sukkah. And that is why you can't eat a suda chutz l'sukkah, because if you eat a suda chutz l'sukkah, you're living chutz l'sukkah, and that's an aveda. But as long as you're not kovei a suda chutz l'sukkah, you're makayim is a sukkah called shiva. Yesod v'shoresh avoida, and many other sifrei musar and sifrei chasidus write in very harsh terms, one should not leave the sukkah. And the word Gedol Yisrael, they just didn't leave their sukkah. It was about 45 years ago. I was a younger man. And I spent Chodesh Tishrei in Union City, New Jersey, by my great Rebbe, Tzanzo, the Divrei Yatzev. And that year, it was raining cats and dogs, all sukkahs. Mamish. It barely stopped raining for a moment. And the Rebbe didn't leave the sukkah. He made a tish in the sukkah. And with a touch of humor, I say, I saw a Nes Golui. From one little plate of soup, he gave shirayim to 100 people. ואין לכו טפח שעולה מלמטו שאין טפוחיים יורדים כנגדו מלמעלה. I'm paraphrasing a Gemara Nedorim. The Gemara says the opposite. אין לכו טפח שיורד מלמעלה שאין טפוחיים יורדים כנגדו מלמטו. So there was one little plate of soup and kama bottle. He didn't leave his sukkah. And the Rebbe and the Hasidim covered their heads in their streimlech with plastic bags. What a sukkahs we had. But the Divrei Chaim, the great Zaidi of the Kloiser Rebbe, as the story goes, didn't leave his sukkah even when it was raining, and he was asked. But the Ramah says, if you sit in the sukkah b'shas eridas geshomim and Chazal say Moshe le'evad, shemaza kois l'rabbi v'shafach loi kiton al panav. So why? How come you sit in the sukkah? So the Divrei Chaim said, for a Kodesh Baruch Hu bin a gleit zu sein a hediot. I'm willing to be a hediot for a Kodesh Baruch Hu. That is not derech hamelech. I think we should all be noyeg like the Shulchan Aruch. When it's raining and you're mistaya, you leave this sukkah. Even great Talmidei Chachamim and Tzaddikim did so. But there are always those yechidim. Those yechidim, those great tzaddikim, the Kloiser Rebbe didn't leave a sukkah. I won't mention a name, but there was another great Rebbe in Borough Park or somewhere else. And that very same year, when it rained, he had the tish in the Beis Medrash. And the Kloiser Rebbe was angry and he said, Evet shemoz a kois l'rabbi v'shofach l'kitten al ponav shouldn't make a tish. You need to leave the sukkah b'tzar, broken-hearted. You don't need to make a tish. I could see both ways in a positive light. I could understand that other Rebbe as well. So what? So there's no more Simchas Yom Tov? Still have a mitzvah of Simchas Echad and Simchas Yom Tov. So why not bring together with the Hasidim and Simchas Yom Tov? So we're put up for mitzvah sukkah. Why not have a tish? Tish is part of the Avodas Hashem. I'm just trying to explain both opinions. And I definitely could see the justification of both Mahalchim. So the Kloiser Rebbe felt, if your Odain throws you out of the sukkah, you need to leave B'boish's Ponim. Don't make a tish. That other tzaddik felt, we still have a mitzvah of Simchas Yom Tov. And a tish is not just enjoying, having fun. It's avodas Hashem, to to bring together with Hasidim, Avodas Ukel, B'shiras v'tishbochos. So as in many other cases, there are different Rocham and Avodas Hashem. I just want to make the point that some tzaddikim never left the sukkah. So the Yesod v'Shorish Avodah, it admonishes us, and he says, one should sit in the sukkah 24 hours a day, unless he needs to do dvorim tznuim, you need to go to the bathroom or similar. And Rabbi Yankov Emden as well says, if you leave your sukkah, you're mavatl mitzvah say. So according to my understanding, if you're makayim sukkah when you're in shul, so why is it so important to sit in the sukkah? No, that's not a kasha at all. I like Hagdoros. I would put it this way. When you sit in the sukkah, you are mekayim mitzvah sukkah. When you're elsewhere, mitzvah sukkah miskayemes al yodai, but he's not mekayim the mitzvah begufoi. And it's different. It's different. So when you actually sit in the sukkah, you're a kayim mitzvah sukkah begufoi, and that definitely has a chibu yisero. That is more chavivus. But on the other hand, once you are kaveya suda, kaveya dira besukkah, mitzvah sukkah miskayemes al yodai, kol shiva, even when he is outside the sukkah. So I know this seems to be a big chiddush, but to me, it's ma'oid nisyashav al alev. I think it's a treatise. Mem ches omed aleph, gomar malachol, lo yistor Succos. Once again, that's a mission in Mem ches omed aleph. Now we're dealing with the last day of Succos, Hoshana Rabbah. He ate a Suda midday. He no longer intends to eat a sukkah. Nevertheless, the Mishnah says, Lo yistor Succos. Don't tear down your sukkah. Don't take it apart. And why not? Two different Perushim, Rashi and the Ram. Rashi says, Dilma miklalei soda. Maybe he will want to eat once again. And therefore, don't take apart your sukkah. Leave it intact. The Ran says, O yistor Succos, sharai chayev lo sheves v'sukkah kol shiva. What does the Ran mean? Gomar malecha. He no longer intends to eat in the sukkah. So why can't he take that sukkah apart? According to my understanding, if you no longer have a sukkah, how would you say I'm living in the sukkah? Which sukkah are you living in? You no longer have a sukkah. And that is why, even though he's not sitting in the sukkah Shana Rav afternoon, but he needs to have that sukkah. Because he needs to dwell in the sukkah called Shiva. If that sukkah is no longer existent, he can no longer be considered living in the sukkah. He no longer has his sukkah. And that's the understanding of the Ran, Loi Yistor Succos. One more point. Probably someone else is waiting to give the shir, so I won't be marach. I just want to make one more comment. Noshim pturos mitzvah say shazman grama. Some noshim meikar adin are potter from lulav and from sukkah. And it's a machlokes to Beis Yosef and the Ramo whether noshim could make a bracha on mitzvah say shazman grama. But it's very interesting. In Menhogech Sam Sofer we learn that in the home of the Sam Sofer, the women did make a bracha on lulav, but they did not make a bracha on sukkah. The Chassan is Sofer with a nun, not with a mem. He was an anikel of the Sam Sofer. He married. His wife was an anikel of the Sam Sofer. So he writes that was the minig of the Sam Sofer, and he gives different interpretations. Why? The Yeshuas Yankov brings, that's minig Lemberg, since the days of the Chacham Tzvi. Noshim say a brocha on lulav, they do not say a brocha on sukkah. Why? According to my approach and my understanding, it makes so much sense, so logical. Because women are not korveya dira in the sukkah. They eat sometimes in the sukkah, they eat out of the sukkah. And ikar mitzvah sukkah is kviyas dira. The Succos, Teshvo, Shivos, Yomim. So the mitzvah sukkah is not actually eating in the sukkah or sitting in the sukkah, but dwelling in the sukkah, living in the sukkah. So Noshim don't have the ability to become this mitzvah b'shleimus, and that's why the minig in Lemberg and the minig in the Samsoifas home was Noshim did not say a bracha on yeshiva b'sukkah, even though they did say a bracha on Nudav. Yosef Masho Marti Lefnechem Kosov Khan. I once again apologize for being late to today's shir, and it's just a miracle. As you see, I'm sitting outside in someone's porch and it's dark behind me. So Baruch Hashem Siyata D'Shmaya B'Schus HaRabim, I made it to this shir. So I apologize once again. So the sukkah we discussed today is a profound sukkah. It's a new approach. It's a naya blick of the mitzvah of sukkah called Shiva. And in Minchas Osher Moedim Chelek Aleph, I discussed this at greater length. I also plan to speak about Tesvav, Machag HaMatzos, but that will need to be on another opportunity. So I hope to see you next Sunday, and I hope next Sunday to be on time. And for the time being, have Ksiva v'chasina toiva v'sifron shel tzadikim gemurim u'shadim avasa v'soiris toivos. And I hope things are okay in your part of the world. They're not so great in our part of the world. And we all daven and hope. Tichel shona v'kirloiseo, tochel shona v'birchoiseo, we should be mavasa v'soiris toivos, and have a good gebenched year for all of you. Ksiva v'chasina toiva.